This is Part 3 of the Chinook Fund online grant application workshop. It is also the last segment of this video series. In Part 3, we will cover grant application forms. This includes the budget form, the diversity chart, and the final checklist. The budget form. This is a partial picture of the Chinook Fund budget form. The Chinook Fund provides a budget form in the grant application packet for applicants who wish to use it. However, organizations are certainly welcome to use their own financial statements and budget forms. Please do not include bank statements, transaction logs, or 990 forms in your application. Please note that some applicants have asked if their budget information should correspond to the Chinook Fund's fiscal year or their own fiscal year. The Chinook Fund does not expect that applicants will, in any way, change or adapt their fiscal years to match ours. Please draw up your budget information according to whichever fiscal year your organization has decided upon. For additional information regarding the budget, please refer to the grant application checklist found in the application documents. Diversity chart. Applicants very commonly have questions pertaining to the diversity chart. A picture of the diversity chart itself can be seen here. Before filling out this chart, it is important to note the first section, which is shown here. The Chinook Fund believes that social change work must be constituent-led and community-wide. Because the leadership of an organization holds the most power and influence, demographic data on the leadership helps us determine how constituent-led and community-wide an organization's work is. Under the section Leadership Number, please provide us with the total number of people you have in the following leadership positions, meaning people who are in key decision-making roles. Staff, if applicable. Board members, if applicable. And other leadership, if applicable. Other leadership can include any volunteer leaders with decision-making power who are not on the board of directors or on staff. This might include member leaders, advisory committee members, and so forth. Remember, however, that other leadership is not a category for participants or general membership who do not have decision-making authority. The diversity chart only requests demographic data for people who hold decision-making positions and positions of authority within the organization. Be sure that the number of people listed here matches the list of leaders provided in the application. And please count people only one time. So, if, for instance, a staff member is also represented on the board, you must choose to put them either in the staff category or the board category. Please do not count them twice. Chart instructions. Please count each person in leadership only one time for each identity section. This is to ensure that the number of staff people, board members, and people in other leadership positions remain consistent in each section. The Chinook Fund recognizes the limitations of this format and that people may identify with more than one category. Please feel free to use and create additional self-identity categories to reflect more nuanced ways of identifying than may be listed here. Self-identity categories are provided for each demographic section on the diversity chart. Additionally, when filling out this chart, please ask people in leadership to indicate how they would prefer to be identified in each of the following categories. Whenever possible, avoid guessing or assuming how people would identify themselves. Again, please ask people in leadership to indicate how they would prefer to be identified in each of the following categories, rather than guessing or assuming how they would prefer to identify themselves. The Chinook Fund recognizes that there are many other marginalized groups that are not included in this chart. please use the category Other Identity found at the bottom of the chart to describe any other identities that are important to your constituency, such as, but certainly not limited to, region, such as rural versus urban, experience with homelessness, including homeless, formerly homeless, never homeless, experience with incarceration, currently incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, never incarcerated, religious affiliation, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Christian, etc. Citizenship status, citizen, green card, undocumented, etc. Immigration status, immigrant versus U.S. born. Class background, low income, working class, middle class, upper class, owning class. For additional information, including definitions and explanations of identities, please visit the Chinook Fund's website at www.chinookfund.org to download a supplemental information packet. You may also request that a supplemental information packet be mailed to you by calling the Chinook Fund office at 303-455-6905. Here is an example of how the chart is filled out. Please adapt this example to suit your organization. If an organization had 3 staff members and 6 board members and no leadership that qualified as other leadership, the applicant would fill out the form as follows. 3 staff members and 6 board members. Taking that same example and applying it to the diversity chart itself, this is how the chart would be filled out. If one staff member identified as being of South Asian descent, another as being of Latina descent, and another as being of Indigenous descent, they would be listed in the first category on the diversity chart as follows. Here, here, and here. Similarly, if one board member identified as being of East Asian descent and another identified as being of South Asian descent, the sample applicant would be 2 under the racial category Asian, South Asian, Pacific Island descent. Here you see that it's listed as 2 in this category associated with board members. Similarly, you would identify the categories that best suit other board members. A sample is provided here. Please notice that the staff total under the race section of the diversity chart is 3, which is the same total provided on the page where leadership numbers were listed. Similarly, the board total under the race section of the diversity chart is 6, which is the same total provided on the page where leadership numbers were listed. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The process is then repeated under the category age. The age-based demographic information for each staff member is filled in, and then the demographic information for each board member is filled in. Again, the total of all of the categories relating to staff is 3, the number of staff members reported by the sample organization, and the total for all of the categories relating to the board is 6, the number of board members reported by the sample organization. 2 and 3 for staff, and 1, 5, 6 for board members. This process is then repeated under sexual orientation. You will notice in this section that the sample organization added a self-identity category, pansexual. The category of pansexual was not provided on the application, so the sample organization provided the identity that best described how one of the staff members identifies. Again, the total for all of the categories relating to staff is 3. the number of staff members reported by the sample organization, and the total for all of the categories relating to the board is 6, the number of board members reported by the sample organization. 1, 2, and 3 on the staff level, 2 and 6 on the board level. This process continues for each identity category, including gender, ability, current class position, and any other oppressed or key identities the applicant wishes to address. It is very important to note that the purpose of this diversity chart is not to tokenize people or be used in a tokenizing manner. The purpose is not to essentialize people according to their identities. Again, the key focus of the diversity chart is to help the grant-making committee better understand how representative an applicant's organization is, and therefore how well it meets community-led and community-wide guidelines. Many prospective applicants comment that they do not know how their leadership identifies demographically, particularly as it relates to sexual orientation, ability, current class position, or gender identity. And they often express discomfort with asking about these demographic categories. People's experiences are fundamentally shaped by the privileges they hold and the oppressions they experience. Identity is inextricably linked to how each person understands and interprets the world. How an organization handles issues of identity is fundamental to how well it incorporates anti-oppression practice and the effectiveness of its work. For example, if an organization does not know the sexual orientation of its leadership, and heterosexism and homophobia are never explicitly addressed, chances are very high that the organization defaults to assuming heterosexuality and reproducing heterosexist and homophobic dynamics, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Being heterosexual is one example of a dominant or privileged identity, and is therefore normalized and made invisible as an identity. When an organization does not pay explicit attention to the needs and experiences of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer leaders, participants, and communities, it is extremely unlikely that the organization can or will create a safe space and environment for LGBTQ people, let alone represent them. This is because the organization will not be aware of how their issue is specifically experienced by and impacts LGBTQ communities, making the organization unable to address all of the root causes of the issue they are working to confront. It is also likely that the vast majority of the leadership of an organization that doesn't address or identify sexual orientation will be heterosexual, and that most of their outreach will be done to heterosexual people. Targeted identities are stigmatized. Not discussing this targeting and stigmatization does not change the fact that the oppression exists and must be addressed in order to achieve social justice. An organization, for instance, cannot work on issues that are explicitly related to class without being able to talk about classism and without understanding the class experiences of the people who comprise the organization. An organization that works on class issues and has a leadership comprised of middle and upper class people must stop and reflect on how their class privilege influences every aspect of the organization, and understand that they cannot claim to represent poor and low-income people or working class people when poor and working class people are not represented in the leadership. For organizations that wish to submit an application but have not asked its leadership to identify demographics, we recommend that you use the diversity chart as an opportunity to open up a meaningful dialogue about identity, social justice work, and social justice values. In addition to this diversity chart, an organization can provide further explanation about their makeup and narrative questions 4 through 6. At this point, we have covered the majority of aspects that a prospective applicant would need to understand in order to determine whether or not they think they are a good fit for the Chinook Fund guidelines, and whether or not they would like to apply for funding. If you would like to apply for funding, please be sure to review the revised grant application guidelines, which can be downloaded from the Chinook Fund's website, and carefully follow each step listed on the grant application checklist. This is a partial example of the grant application checklist. The steps included on this checklist include filling out the grant application cover sheet, the proposal narrative, 1-year work plan, 501c3 information, if applicable, budget information, leadership information, references, and the diversity chart. Please read the grant application checklist in full for complete instruction. Finally, please include 4 complete copies of your proposal, including one that is not stapled or bound and does not contain any two-sided sheets. All applicants must be sure to postmark or bring their applications into the office by no later than 5 p.m. on the deadline date. Incomplete or late proposals will not be accepted. The Chinook Fund is located at 3280 Downing Street, Suite B, Denver, Colorado 80205. You have just completed Part 3 of the 3-part Grant Application Workshop series. If you have additional questions, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is here.